Breakups are never fun, but some people go completely overboard with their reaction to being dumped. Such was the case for a 44-year-old Florida woman named Amy Yeager, who stands accused of stabbing her 70-year-old boyfriend because he ended their relationship and cancelled their vacation plans. According to a criminal complaint, the man wanted to go separate ways because he was tired of dealing with Yeager's alcohol abuse. He told law enforcement that Yeager grabbed a knife and chased after him as he attempted to flee to safety. Furious over the rejection, Yeager stabbed the victim in the face, hands, back, chest, legs, and arms. The man eventually managed to reach a neighbor's house where Yeager followed him. She kicked the door in and tried prying it open with a knife, then attempted to reach her hand inside to unlock it, while the victim swatted at her hand with a piece of broken wood. Pinellas County Deputy Christopher Ryan arrived at the scene during Yeager's efforts to break in and ordered her to stop. The crazed woman began walking toward Ryan with the knife raised in a threatening manner and continued ignoring his commands to stop, prompting him to shoot 11 bullets at her with his service weapon. Yeager was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and Ryan was placed on administrative leave while an investigation into the shooting was carried out. Authorities concluded that he acted out of a justified and legitimate fear for his life, and the state declined to pursue criminal charges. After recovering enough from her injuries to be released from the hospital, Yeager was booked into the Pinellas County Jail on charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault of a law enforcement officer, and armed burglary. She remains behind bars amid her ongoing case with bonds totaling $50,000.
Hey, it's Carl. I'm back with another T-shirt giveaway. Once again, I'm writing down a secret number between 0 and 5,000. If you guess it correctly in the comments section, as a reply to our pinned post on today's YouTube video, we'll send you a free They Will Kill You T-shirt of your choice, and you'll be featured in one of our videos. But remember, only guesses in the comments section of our YouTube video are eligible. Guesses here on Instagram don't count. So, best of luck to you.
Number 15. Steve Lamar Goss Jr. A Mississippi mother was at home with her 3 kids in January of 2024 when a knife-wielding intruder tried kicking in the front door of their Carroll County home. When he failed to gain entry, he rammed his truck into the family's dining room. Determined to protect her children from danger, the woman grabbed her gun and hid in a closet, the family's designated safe room, as the burglar continued his rampage. Her husband, who was at work, was alerted to the situation and called the police. The intruder, 44-year-old Steve Lamar Goss Jr., eventually found the family in their hiding place. When he opened the door with the knife in his hand, the woman shot him in the arm. Goss fled the scene in his pickup truck, which was soon noticed by deputies who had received a description of the vehicle. They attempted to enact a felony traffic stop in the parking lot, but the fleeing suspect exited the truck and ran into the store, where the deputies quickly caught up with him. Goss, who was out on bond for an unrelated gun charge at the time of the home invasion, was taken to the hospital where he received treatment for his gunshot wound. He was subsequently booked into custody on 4 accounts of attempted murder and 1 count of burglary. In addition to the state-level charges against him, he faces a federal gun charge for an unrelated incident that occurred in late 2023. Number 14. LVL Adams. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in July of 2024, a Los Angeles resident called 911 to report an attempted armed break-in at their Beverlywood home. By the time officers arrived at 3:20 a.m., the knife-wielding suspect had left the caller's residence and barricaded himself inside the home of their 80-year-old neighbor. The house was on fire, but the old woman had thankfully managed to escape. Later identified as 31-year-old LVL Adams, the intruder was holed up in the senior citizen's bedroom. He could be seen talking and yelling to himself through the windows as a trail of smoke rose into the sky. Police tried coaxing Adams outside, but he flat out refused to surrender, giving law enforcement no choice but to force their way inside. As they entered the room, officers found Adams kneeling in the corner of the room, naked and facing the wall. They ordered him to stand up and put his hands in the air, but instead of cooperating, he charged at the cops with a large knife raised above his head. An officer shot the suspect with beanbag rounds, causing him to collapse. Adams dropped the knife for a few brief moments but rearmed himself, ignoring commands to leave the weapon on the floor. The police retreated outside and called in a SWAT team, who were positioning themselves outside the residence when the suspect climbed out a window with a blanket over himself. After noticing that Adams still had the knife, the SWAT officers repeatedly ordered him to put it down. They gave him several chances to obey their commands to drop the weapon and get on his knees, warning him that if he didn't comply, they were going to use force. With the blanket still draped over himself, Adams charged at the officers with the knife in his hand, prompting them to open fire in self-defense. Life-saving efforts were immediately undertaken, but he died from his injuries. The LAPD is investigating the incident and will forward their findings to the police chief, who will make a recommendation regarding whether the use of force was justified. A civilian board of police commissioners will ultimately decide if the officers acted in accordance with the department's policies. Number 13. Twain Thomas. In February of 2014, James Svengros of Pocatello, Idaho, overheard his neighbor screaming at the discovery of a home intruder. Fearing that he would be targeted next, he set up a video camera facing his front door and armed himself. He opened the door long enough to see a machete-wielding man in the hallway of his apartment building and quickly retreated back inside. Svengros locked and deadbolted the front door while his terrified girlfriend looked on. Just moments later, the intruder kicked his way through the front door. In the video Svengros captured, he could be heard warning the suspect, 54-year-old Twain Thomas, that he had a weapon and yelling at him to calm down. Thomas ignored the warnings and barged into the home, prompting Svengros to shoot him 3 times in the chest. It was the second time the suspect had kicked the victim's door down, with the previous incident being the reason that Svengros bought a weapon in the first place. The violent trespasser was fortunate enough to survive and pleaded guilty to aggravated assault in exchange for a prison sentence of 5 to 15 years. Thomas's defense attorney had urged the court to send the defendant to a mental facility, arguing that his client was a peaceful man with no history of violence who suddenly snapped. The victims, on the other hand, would have liked to see a longer prison sentence. Speaking with the Idaho State Journal after Thomas's sentencing hearing, Svengros revealed that he had watched the footage of the intrusion for the first time in nearly a year during the court proceedings, and while seeing it brought back some unpleasant memories, Svengros had no regrets about his handling of the situation, stating in his own words, "There's not a doubt in my mind that I did the right thing." Number 12. Tracy Watson. Chicago police officers were on routine patrol in the city's Austin neighborhood late one night in May of 2024 when they noticed 35-year-old father of 4 Tracy D. Watson attacking another man with a knife in the street. According to law enforcement, the cops ordered him to stop stabbing the victim, but he continued, prompting them to open fire on Watson. He was shot multiple times and died from the injuries despite the officers' attempts to perform life-saving measures. Following the tragedy, Watson's family told ABC7 that he had been acting in self-defense and that there was more to the story. A relative claimed that 2 men had approached Watson at a bus station where he was waiting with his cousin and confronted him for urinating in public. One of the men punched Watson in the face and the pair fled the scene on foot. Watson and his cousin chased after the men, leading to another altercation in a vacant lot. One of the alleged attackers struck Watson in the face with a bottle during the fist fight, which soon spilled over into the street. Police arrived to find Watson standing over one of the men and repeatedly stabbing him as he lay on the pavement. The officers waited 10 seconds for Watson to obey their commands to stop before they resorted to deadly force. Almost immediately after the cops shot Watson, the officers' body cams captured footage of his cousin asking them why they didn't try tasing the man first. An investigation is currently underway to determine whether the police acted reasonably in their decision to resort to gunfire. Number 11. Miguel Tapia. In June of 2024, police in Denver, Colorado, responded to multiple reports from drivers about a transgender woman who was shouting disturbing statements at passing motorists. while standing in the middle of the road. Included among the 911 callers was a park ranger who alerted law enforcement to a 7 to 8 inch hunting-style knife in the person's possession. When officers arrived, they noticed a knife handle protruding from the pedestrian's shoulder bag. They tried to de-escalate the situation by encouraging the suspect, 52-year-old Miguel Tapia, to put her hands on her head. Instead of cooperating, Tapia reached into her bag for the knife and pointed it directly at an officer. The cops initially avoided resorting to gunfire by tasing the suspect, but this failed to slow Tapia down even after being hit twice, and she began advancing aggressively toward the police with the blade in her hand. Left with no other perceived options, 3 officers opened fire on Tapia, shooting her 12 times in 2 seconds. She died from her injuries, which included multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Following an investigation, District Attorney McCann concluded that the officers had acted reasonably in their decision to use deadly force, noting in a report that Tapia could have seriously injured or killed someone if she had been able to continue advancing toward them. Additionally, McCann determined that it would have seriously endangered the officers to spend any more time issuing verbal warnings to Tapia. The state declined to pursue criminal charges, and the cops involved in the shooting resumed full duty. Number 10. Douglas Hill. In June of 2024, Los Angeles police officers responded to a reported assault at the Mayako Hotel in the city's Little Tokyo neighborhood. They arrived at 3:30 in the morning to find an Illinois man, later identified as 39-year-old Douglas Hill, standing in the lobby with a long black knife in his hand. The officers immediately ordered Hill to drop the weapon and face the wall, but he refused to comply and could be heard saying, "You're not cops," in body cam footage of the interaction. He also said, "You don't have a gun, you got a flashlight." Hill repeatedly walked toward the cops while continuing to ignore their demands to put the knife down, and perhaps not surprisingly was shot at least 2 times as an officer opened fire in self-defense. The uncooperative suspect was treated for his injuries at the hospital and booked into custody on 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. His case appears to be ongoing. Number 9. Austin Sumpter. Late one night in May of 2024, a homeowner in Thrall, Texas, called 911 and reported that someone was trying to break into his house. Police arrived a few minutes later to find 23-year-old Austin Sumpter lying on the front porch with a gunshot wound to the hip. In his possession was a knife inside a sheath bearing the engraved words, "Hail Satan." According to law enforcement, Sumpter had succeeded in breaking into the home after the 911 call, prompting the owner to shoot him in self-defense. He was treated at a nearby hospital for non-life-threatening injuries and booked into custody on suspicion of burglarizing a residence with the intent of committing a felony. The accused homeowner is currently being detained at the Williamson County Jail with bail set at $25,000. While he appears to have no previous felony charges or convictions, records show that he was charged with misdemeanor trespassing in 2019, indicating a possible history of making unwelcome visits to other people's properties. Number 8. Kenzie Vardell. In the fall of 2023, a Kentucky teenager was charged with the attempted murder of a police officer in Mount Washington. In the early hours of November the 4th, Officer Mark Brammer of the Mount Washington Police Department began his shift by unlocking the gates to Lindsay Duval Park. Upon doing so, he noticed that 18-year-old Kenzie Vardell was trespassing in the park. He tried to get her personal information, but the teen took off running. A foot chase ensued, during which Brammer urged Vardell to stop and identified himself as a police officer multiple times. He caught up with the teen outside a residence in Emma Court, at which point she put both her hands up. Brammer approached her with the intention of handcuffing her. In the moments that followed, Vardell spun around and stabbed the officer with a screwdriver above his left eye. In spite of being hurt, Brammer was able to bring Vardell under control. The teen was taken into custody by the officer's colleagues and booked at the Bullitt County Detention Center. An investigation was launched into other possible crimes that the teen had committed at the park. prior to being discovered by Brammer. Shortly after the screwdriver attack, the officer was taken to UL South for treatment and was later released. Number 7. Incident in Germany. In late May of 2024, a far-right demonstration was held in Marktplatz Square in the city of Mannheim, Germany. The rally was hosted by Islam-critical journalist Michael Sturzenberger and his organization called the Citizens Movement Pax Europa, or BPE. Violence broke out during the live-streamed event just as Sturzenberger was preparing to speak. Cell phone video captured an unnamed bearded man as he started randomly stabbing people. Newspaper Mannheimer Morgen reported that the attacker injured 6 people, including Sturzenberger, 4 other BPE members and 1 police officer. Bystanders had at one point grappled with the knife man, but he broke free and managed to stab the officer in the back. Another cop then shot him, putting an end to the rampage. The officer he'd knifed was left in critical condition and had to undergo emergency surgery. The knife wielder was injured, but he too survived. A motive for the stabbing wasn't immediately disclosed, but local media identified the attacker as a 25-year-old man who was born in Afghanistan but lived in Germany. The case was ongoing as of the latest updates. Number 6. Daren Walker. 28-year-old Detroit man Daren Walker threatened one of his neighbors with a pistol during a dispute that took place on July the 4th of 2020. He then barricaded himself in a house on the city's west side, but was ultimately taken into custody by the local police's Special Response Team. Walker was transported to the Detroit Receiving Hospital's Crisis Center for a mental health evaluation. The findings of the medical staff remained unclear, but within 24 hours the man was back on the street. Less than a month later, on July the 30th, Walker experienced another mental health crisis. He donned black clothing, a vest with protective padding akin to the equipment worn by hockey players, and armed himself with a medieval sword and a dagger. Walker started walking through his neighborhood and was spotted by a passing police patrol car near Grand River and Myers. The ensuing confrontation was captured on body cam and cell phone video. As soon as the officers got out of their vehicle, Walker charged them, swinging his sword. Law enforcement asked him multiple times to drop the weapon, but he continued to advance. Walker was shot with a taser, but it proved ineffective due to his protective clothing. The man was shown on video pulling out the 8-inch dagger, which he then threw at one of the officers, striking him in the face and cutting him below the eye. Walker wouldn't back down, prompting an officer to draw his service weapon and fire a shot. Even after he was hit by a bullet, Walker marched on and chased the officers. He then got into the squad car's driver's seat, but Good Samaritan motorist Andre Johnson saw what was happening and used his vehicle to pin him inside. Johnson later told the media officers asked him about 3 or 4 times to put the weapons down. They tased him, but that didn't stop him, and then he pulled out this knife they make in Nepal, and he ran after the officers. Cops eventually took Walker into custody and tried to transport him to a hospital, but he succumbed to his gunshot wound on the way. Number 5. Payman Baharon. On June the 4th of 2020, New York City man Payman Baharon followed officers Jillian Suarez and Melissa Brown into the Healthy Green Gourmet Deli in East Village. 55-year-old Baharon, who was walking his terrier, would later tell the media that he was manic, paranoid, scared, and anxious about the BLM protests taking place in the area. As recorded by the deli's surveillance cameras, he started screaming at the cops and pulled out a large serrated knife from a sheath on his belt. He waved it above his head before moving towards Brown in a threatening manner. The officer retreated and fired her taser at him, but the probes didn't make contact with Baharon. In the meantime, Suarez went outside and radioed for backup. Baharon gave up on menacing Brown and then pointed the 12-inch blade at a clerk, who grabbed a kitchen knife in response. The aggressor demanded a pack of cigarettes and the worker obliged. Baharon had been holding on to his dog leash throughout his threatening display. When the clerk handed him the cigarettes, he briefly placed his knife on the counter to grab the pack. The worker quickly snatched it and handed it to Brown. Baharon then left the deli without the blade and began shoving Suarez, who had her service weapon aimed at him. In the moments that followed, Lieutenant Luis Mercado and Officer Brian Rosansky arrived at the scene. Baharon remained aggressive and reached for his sheath as he lunged towards Mercado. Suarez and Rosansky fired their service weapons, hitting him in the arm and lower back. Baharon survived but was left paralyzed from the waist down and with limited use of his left arm. Updates from 2021 indicated that he was suing the NYPD and the two cops who'd shot him, alleging that they should have known he was no longer armed with the knife when they opened fire. Number 4. Damon Savage. Shortly after midnight on August the 27th of 2020, Australian law enforcement officers received multiple calls about a domestic disturbance in Dakabin. 27-year-old Damon Savage had reportedly slashed his girlfriend with a knife, prompting her to flee their home and seek refuge with their neighbors. The woman survived the attack. 4 officers walked up to Savage's residence and he emerged with a knife in each hand. He kept walking aggressively towards the cops, ignoring their commands for him to drop the weapons. Acting Sergeant Stephen Warrentini deployed his taser, but Savage didn't go down and lunged towards him. Senior Constable Mark Whitson would later state that he believed Warrentini had been stabbed. Whitson and a second officer opened fire and shot Savage multiple times. Cops performed CPR, but the knifeman was pronounced dead at the scene. He was reported to have been experiencing a mental health crisis in the days leading up to the incident. Senior Constable Karen Hart lived opposite Savage and she provided further insight into the events that preceded the shooting. Hart, who was off duty at the time, rushed to help Savage's girlfriend upon seeing her flee the couple's home. Savage subsequently went after the two women and Hart recounted, "I could see he had a knife in each hand. I couldn't tell you what type, I could only see the shine off the blade from the street light." Hart took refuge inside her home and Savage stabbed her crime-safe door roughly 5 times, with each strike breaking through to the other side. Hart, who remembered a blade going past her face, said of Savage, "His face was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The rage was like nothing I've never seen on a job I've been to." Number 3. Samuel Sharp. On July the 16th of 2024, a knifeman was fatally shot in Milwaukee, roughly a mile from a venue hosting the Republican National Convention, which was due to be attended by presidential candidate and former U.S. President Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. Officers from Columbus, Ohio were stationed in the area to strengthen security given an assassination attempt on Trump that had occurred at a rally just 3 days prior. Body cam footage showed a dozen Columbus officers standing in a circle before a shirtless homeless man, identified as Samuel Sharp, reportedly charged them with a steak knife in each hand. Officers ordered 43-year-old Sharp to let go of the blaze, but he didn't comply. Up to 8 cops were reported to have simultaneously opened fire, killing the man at the scene. Edward Watkins, a fellow homeless man and a friend of Sharp's, was living with him in a tent in the area. Watkins told the New York Post, "He just told me he was having these thoughts in his head, and he said, 'Jehovah's coming down,' and I believed him because I hear voices too." Watkins went on to say that he knew Sharp was ready to go when he armed himself with the knives. An investigation was launched in the aftermath to determine if the police's use of lethal force was justified. Sharp's attack was believed to have been a consequence of his mental health struggle and unrelated to the Republican convention. Today's topic was requested by Ben Hill 3807 and Tom Billard 5264. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Courtney Topic. On February the 10th of 2015, Australian woman Courtney Topic, aged 22, left her home in the West Hoxton suburb of Sydney carrying a large kitchen knife. The authorities were alerted after she was seen acting erratically, hitting herself in the head and pointing the knife at herself while in the parking lot of a Hungry Jack's. 3 police officers arrived to question her, but within less than a minute, Topic would be dead. She failed to comply with the officers' orders and was pepper sprayed. Constable Angela Tyson also tried to shoot her with a taser, but it malfunctioned due to damaged cartridges and battery degradation. Topic then lunged towards Senior Constable Ethan Tesorero, who discharged his police-issued pistol, killing her on the spot. In the incident's wake, Deputy New South Wales State Coroner Elizabeth Ryan determined that Topic was suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia and was most likely having a psychotic episode at the time of her death. A mental state would have likely made it difficult for her to understand the officer's commands. Ryan accepted that the three cops hadn't broken procedure and that Tesorero had a reasonable basis to believe his life was in danger. However, the coroner deemed that the officers had been entirely inappropriate in their attempts to disarm Topic and should have tried other means of persuading her to drop the knife. Ryan recommended a major review of police training in how to deal with people experiencing mental health emergencies, similar to Topic's. She proposed the use of de-escalation techniques as well as better training for dispatchers in identifying said emergencies when taking calls. The three officers involved in the shooting were deeply affected by the incident, but Topic's parents said that they didn't blame them. They described their daughter as a gentle-natured young woman who'd never before acted the way she had on the day of her death. If you thought you couldn't read the room any worse, wait till you see how an encounter with a gangster ends horribly. Stay tuned till after number 1. We've got our previous release of When Fucking With Gangsters Goes Wrong coming right up. Number 1. John David Brousseau. On June the 15th of 2020, law enforcement in Arizona were called to a supermarket in Phoenix, where 55-year-old John David Brousseau had threatened customers and workers with a knife. A female officer arrived at the scene and confronted Brousseau in the parking lot. The officer's body cam captured the man yelling at her menacingly, insulting her and threatening to slit her throat, while swinging the blade wildly. Brousseau, who was believed to have been inebriated at the time, briefly turned his attention to someone else in the parking lot, but the cop re-engaged him. The man aggressively disregarded repeated commands to drop the knife and sit on the ground. The situation culminated with him running towards the officer and her consequently discharging her weapon. Brousseau, who was wearing shorts and sandals at the time of his rampage, collapsed and started wailing on the ground, crying out, "That hurt!" He was expected to recover, and his deranged actions resulted in him being charged with aggravated assault. In the early hours of May the 1st of 2021, authorities in Salt Lake City, Utah, were notified of a car crash along Interstate 80 near 200 East. Police and paramedics responded to the scene where the sole vehicle involved had reportedly collided with a median. A woman, subsequently identified as 32-year-old Shandon Scott, was found dead inside the wrecked car. Further investigation established that Scott had suffered fatal gunshot wounds prior to the crash, which had served as a last-ditch attempt to cover up her murder. A law enforcement spokesperson revealed that earlier that night, Scott had gotten into a domestic dispute with her boyfriend, Terrence Trent Voss, at a home near Nibley Park in Mill Creek. The situation evidently escalated and Voss fired 12 rounds into his partner in a rage. In his ensuing cover-up efforts, the 32-year-old man crashed the car into the freeway median and fled on foot, but was immediately identified as a suspect. Salt Lake City police swiftly tracked him down and arrested him. Voss faced charges of aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, possession of a weapon by a restricted person, and 3 counts of discharge of a firearm, all classified as first-degree felonies. The man already had a lengthy criminal history stemming from his past as a gang member, which had once led to him being named Public Enemy Number 1 by the Salt Lake Metro Gang Unit. As he was awaiting trial in connection with Scott's slaying, Voss faced further legal troubles following a prison brawl in which he and multiple other inmates were stabbed. He was taken to the hospital where a piece of metal around 6 inches long that was sharpened to a bladed point was found in his underwear. He consequently had a count of possession of a dangerous weapon by a restricted person added to his list of pending charges. Number 6. Nazareth Tamer Cloy. NYPD officers observed 4 men place a large object in the trunk of a car as they left a home on Foam Place in Far Rockaway during the early morning hours of April the 14th of 2021. The officers tailed the vehicle before pulling it over near Nassau Expressway and Bayview Avenue. During an ensuing search of the car, law enforcement found a deceased woman wrapped in a blanket in the trunk. The 4 men were taken into custody on suspicion of murder. Authorities identified the woman as 31-year-old Nazareth Tamer Clory, the landlord of a building in Queens. Though her connection to the suspects was initially unclear, it eventually emerged that each of the men involved were members of MS-13, as was Tamer Clory's boyfriend, Ananda Enriquez. The woman had reportedly obtained an order of protection against 28-year-old Enriquez following repeated domestic violence incidents. The most recent altercation, during which Tamer Clory was choked by her gangster boyfriend, occurred just days before her death. The 4 male suspects had allegedly been enlisted by Enriquez to eliminate his girlfriend in retaliation for her reporting him to the authorities. On April the 11th, 3 days before the traffic stop, Tamer Clory was viciously beaten with a baseball bat, then hacked to death with machetes. Alan Lopez, Jose Sarmiento, and Miguel Ojero were each charged for the murder in addition to Enriquez. A 5th suspect, named as Rodolfo Lopez, was only accused of concealing a human corpse and tampering with physical evidence. Number 5. Michelle Scott. Colorado woman Michelle Scott was reported missing on the night of February the 13th of 2022, having last been seen by a neighbor 3 days earlier. The following day, which was Valentine's Day, Scott's ex-boyfriend, Wayne Lotz, was spotted driving her Toyota Highlander around town. He was taken into custody on a relatively minor charge of vehicle theft and financial fraud, as he was also in possession of the missing woman's debit card. He claimed that his ex-girlfriend was on vacation and that he had permission to use her vehicle and credit card while he cared for her dogs and horses. The day after Lotz's arrest, however, Scott's remains were found near the intersection of Pleasant Park Road and Highgrade Road in the Pleasant Park corridor of Jefferson County. The discovery led to Lotz facing additional charges of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and tampering with a deceased human body. The local sheriff's office revealed that they'd been called about domestic violence incidents involving Scott and Lotz on numerous occasions in the past. The woman obtained a protective order against her ex, but only 10 days before she was killed, he pleaded guilty to violating it. Less than a week before Scott's disappearance, the former couple had reportedly had their final domestic altercation before Lotz fatally strangled the woman and dumped her body. In May of 2023, the man was convicted of the charges levied against him and sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Carla Maria Fornari. On the night of March the 17th of 2014, a high-speed car chase unfolded in the town of Palagiano, near Taranto, in the southern Italian region of Puglia. A hotspot for holidaymakers, the area also reportedly serves as the heartland of the local mafia known as the Sacra Corona Unita. The vehicle being chased, a red hatchback, was eventually forced off the road and pushed up against a concrete barrier. The occupants of the hatchback were subsequently shot by their machine gun-wielding pursuers, later identified as mafia hitmen. Authorities arrived at the scene to find the targeted car riddled with bullets. 3 of the people inside the vehicle were pronounced dead, including the hitmen's reported target, 43-year-old Cosimo Orlando. The latter, a convicted mobster, previously spent over a decade behind bars for a double murder committed in 1998. Upon being released on parole, Orlando allegedly eased back into the drug trade. His criminal ties ultimately led to the fatal shooting in Palagiano, which also claimed the lives of his partner, Carla Maria Fornari, and her young son, Domenico. 2 other children inside the vehicle miraculously survived. Domenico had reportedly been named after his father, who was gunned down in a separate gang-related shooting that occurred 3 months before he was born. Number 3. Lindsay Hill. In 2015, convicted felon Robert Jackson was serving time behind bars in Washington state for robbery when a computer glitch led to him being erroneously released early. 2 months later, on November the 11th, Jackson crashed his car while driving drunk, killing his girlfriend, Lindsay Hill. Following the accident, the man allegedly left Hill's body in the car, where it was ultimately found by her teen son. He was consequently charged with vehicular homicide, of which he was later found guilty. Subsequent reports indicated that Jackson was initially supposed to receive a life sentence for the deadly crash, given it was his 3rd serious felony conviction. However, changes to the state's 3 strikes rule brought about his resentencing in 2022. In lieu of life in prison, King County prosecutors reportedly sought a 52-year sentence for the repeat offender. During court proceedings in September, a judge sentenced 45-year-old Jackson to 33 years instead, citing the maximum punishment for vehicular homicide, according to state law. Number 2. Analine P. Analine P was on the phone with her mother as she left her job at a shipping and logistics company in the coastal South African city of Durban on November the 29th of 2016. At one point during the phone call, the 27-year-old confessed, "Mummy, I'm scared." For 10 years, Analine had been in an abusive relationship with a gun-obsessed man by the name of Tyrone P. She'd recently ended their involvement, but Tyrone allegedly wasn't keen on letting their relationship die peacefully. Analine was fearful that her disgruntled and rageful ex might lash out in violence, an inkling that soon came to fruition. Minutes after Analine's conversation with her mother, she encountered Tyrone, who chased her up a fire escape outside her workplace. The man executed the defenseless woman with 5 gunshots to her head, as was captured in horrifying CCTV footage. Tyrone had reportedly placed a tracking device on Analine's vehicle, which allowed him to zero in on her location. He'd grown incensed after the victim stopped taking his phone calls, and also claimed that she was having an affair with a married man. His enmity towards Analine boiled over into extreme violence on the day of the shooting, the footage of which went viral in South Africa and caused a public outcry, with many calling for Tyrone to be put away for life. He ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced at Durban High Court in May of 2018. The presiding judge handed down a prison term of 25 years for murder and possession of a firearm. As he was led out of the courtroom, Tyrone smiled and gave a thumbs up to the gallery, which largely consisted of Analine's friends and family. Number 1. Ellie Price. 26-year-old Ellie Price was found dead at her South Melbourne townhouse on May the 4th of 2020. The young mother had reportedly been fatally stabbed by her on-again, off-again boyfriend several days earlier. The suspect, 33-year-old Ricardo Barbaro, subsequently went on the run, triggering a national manhunt. A man in the town of Stowell contacted local authorities after spotting Barbaro's white van, which he recognized from media reports. Barbaro, whose family was described as an Australian branch of the Italian mafia, was ultimately located and arrested. A close friend of Price's named Mark Gray told investigators that a few weeks before her death, she had a strange mark on her neck. She claimed that Barbaro had tried to strangle her. Gray, it emerged, had been financially supporting Price and her family since he met her in 2017 at the Men's Gallery, where she worked as an exotic dancer. He rejected the notion that he was a sugar daddy, but did admit to covering the women's rent up to 6 months in advance, purchasing her a cat, and paying for other expenses. Gray served as a key witness in court, where it was established that Barbaro had gotten physical with Price before, including the time in which he'd inflicted a cut above her eye. The victim's mother stated that she'd been planning to move back to her home state of Tasmania until Barbaro was completely out of her life. The latter pleaded not guilty to his murder charges. However, as was revealed during his 2023 trial, the crime scene had been littered with his fingerprints, including a bloody print on Price's bathroom mirror. As of the latest updates, the court proceedings were still ongoing. Thanks for watching. If you could bare knuckle box anyone, who would it be and why? Let us know in the comments section below.